This is Art Sense, a podcast focused on educating and informing listeners about the past, present, and future of art. I'm Craig Gould. On today's episode, I speak with artist Alex Prager about her decades of stage photography that explore our shared humanity through the use of vibrant colors, dramatic lighting, and carefully crafted characters. The conversation includes details of Prager's formative years abroad, the moment she realized she had to become a photographer, and her latest show up now at Lehmann Maupin in New York. And now, a conversation about being more than just a face in the crowd with artist Alex Prager. Alex Prager, thank you so much for joining me this week on the Art Sense podcast. Alex, I usually like to start with artists with a hypothetical, which is, let's say you're at a dinner party seated next to somebody who has no idea who you are or what your work looks like. How do you start to describe that to them?
Just so you know, I'm happy to be here too. Thanks for having me. I just had this happen actually at a dinner party about 3 weeks ago. And it's always fun because, I think it makes the conversation kind of interesting for me because I get to feel a little incognito and pick their brain about, different things and,
Sure.
different art that they like before they feel like that they have to, like my kind of art,
Right.
So, this just happened. And I guess when I don't love talking about my own, we're on a podcast and I'm saying that, so that's kind of silly, but it's definitely not my first thing that I would choose to do, just talk about my work. I don't love it. But it's part of being an artist. When you can't show the work, you have to talk about it, I guess. Right. And, so what I used to say is, I used to have this kind of go-to line of a film that was never made, and that was kind of how I looked at it before. But then I got really interested in film, and I started actually making films. And now my photography means something else to me, very different than my films. I consider them very different mediums. So now I don't really have a go-to kind of thing. I usually just pull out my phone and try and show them something if they insist, and then we can just start discussing a particular piece or something. But that's a long answer.
No, it's okay. But, it's funny that question, just like it opens up a conversation at the dinner party, it kind of opens up a conversation for us because it kind of leads into, how has your work changed? If you described it back then as a film never made, that kind of insinuates that we're seeing frames from a narrative. Do you feel like there's still as strong a narrative in your work now as then? Or, how is it different now visually than it was 10 or 15 years ago?
Yeah, well, certainly in the films, there's a narrative. Whether it's kind of a poetic narrative that's more abstract and intuitive, because they're short films, so there isn't so much a narrative like you're used to in a 2-hour feature film yet. But they've always had this sense of before, during, and after, like what happened to land the person in this situation that they find themselves in, and where the hell are they going to go from here? That's always been a strong interest of mine. But as I moved more into films, I got that medium covered for. I feel like I really had to ask myself once I really got into films, what was my purpose of continuing to make still photographs? What did still photography mean to? And I really got to explore that for the first time all over again, which was exciting. And I realized I didn't want to let it go because it actually was really important to me in my practice. And and just my evolution, if you can call it that, of creativity, right? And so photography has really become a way for me to, because with film, you kind of can only, unless you're PTA and you can tell 7 stories at once, and have them all meet at the end, which is very challenging to do for a young filmmaker like myself. You can really only tell one, people really only want to follow one story at a time, I think, for the traditional narrative films. And they want it to be very clear. So if you're trying to put a lot of stories in, and I'm in love with people, and I love all the details in their faces and their clothing and the things they carry with them, because every little piece that you see makes up a part of a story. And if you have a lot of people in the picture, like I tend to, then you've got that many stories to tell, and maybe all the stories too that are just outside the frame that you kind of sense. So that still photography is really the only place I can explore all of those stories. And also there's stories like the ones that you can't sense that I nod to. Is they go so much more than just the physical. There's the metaphysical too. There's the dream space and this magic area that we all perceive in life and everyday life. The emotional or psychological space is almost more important than what's very obviously in front of you in the picture. So there's a lot more going on in those senses. And sure, films have all that too, but photography really lets me explore things in a different way and a multitude of things at once.
I talked to a lot of photographers about the goal and the struggle to leave work open-ended, right? And I feel like as a genre here in the U.S., we've almost been trained to anticipate some sort of resolution at the end of a film versus French cinema. They just kind of cut the last scene totally out of the movie. And it's intentional, right? It's like to give someone the ability to question how might it have ended. And there's a certain sense of ownership that goes with that, right? So there's an open-ended photograph can give you a more personal experience in terms of how you resolve what's going on than being hand-fed some ending that we could have preconceived or said, well, I wish it had ended differently, right?
Exactly, yeah. I think the best works of art have always been just full of a question. There's never really the answer in the work, because the answer lies within whoever's viewing that work. And there's an actual flow of communication that goes back and forth between the artwork and the viewer. And that's why it's different for each person. It's so subjective. And usually art is viewed in that more private space so that you can have the ability to just quiet down and be in that conversation with the artist's question.
I've tried to do my homework on Alex Prager, and it's funny. I can't tell you how many artists I talk to who say, I had a very unconventional childhood, and I understand. I understand the same could be said for you. Can you tell us a little bit about maybe those formative years and how they kind of shaped your worldview as it turned into an artistic practice?
So my childhood, I started to get into a bit of trouble growing up in Los Angeles at the exact normal time that a teenager begins to get in trouble. So basically, when I became a teenager, I started to become very curious about what was outside of the life that I was being presented by my parents.
Right.
and I was living in Los Angeles, and so of course, I got into a bit of trouble, and my parents were not very happy. I'm trying to water this part down a little bit. It wasn't that bad, but basically, I ended up getting kicked out of school, and and I was 14. And and then that summer, when I was kind of making amends or whatever you do when you're in trouble during the summer, not having the best time, I ended up meeting this girl, Sarah, and she told me that her grandparents in Switzerland, in Lucerne, Switzerland, owned this knife shop, and they needed English-speaking people to work there over the summer, and would I want to go with her to do that? And somehow I convinced my parents that this would be the way that I could make up for being in trouble in Los Angeles, because there wasn't really much of a way I could get in trouble in Lucerne, Switzerland, because it's a pretty sleepy town, and I would have to work a job, and I had these two, elderly people kind of looking after us. So I convinced them, and we went to Switzerland. And actually, it was the best thing that happened to me up to that point, because my parents let me go, and we didn't really have any supervision, because her grandparents were just like, as long as you do your work in the knife shop, then on the weekends you can go wherever you want on the Eurostar. And it was Sarah and I just exploring Europe together every weekend, and hiking up the Alps and drinking fresh milk from the cows at the farmer where we were staying. Like we were just having like this idyllic experience in the Swiss Alps, and it was crazy. It was so beautiful. I had just gotten a really terrible like plastic. I think it was like a $5 plastic camera, but I wasn't a photographer yet. I didn't think of myself as a photographer. I had it just to take some snapshots while I was there. And I was just completely enamored with everything that I saw, the whole experience, the lifestyle, the culture change. It opened my eyes to the rest of the world in this way that I couldn't believe that, like, Los Angeles is the kind of place that makes you just feel like you could never leave. And, I think that's what Hotel California is about. Like, you think you can leave, but you always go back. Like, it just makes you feel like it has everything. The whole world is encapsulated in this snow globe of a city. Right. And so when I got out of it at such a young age, I was really impressed, and I was really, I had this sort of respect for the way that the rest of the world lives. I mean, I felt like I was seeing the whole world despite seeing Europe, because it was my first time really outside of it. And it completely changed my perspective. It completely changed how I became responsible for myself in this way that I probably never would have if I was trying to rebel from parents in Los Angeles, because I really had to be responsible for myself, because there was no one really looking after me. So I became more responsible. It was a funny little trick.
Right.
But yeah, it was great. And then when I finally did go back to Los Angeles when I was 18, I went back a few times to visit, but I ended up spending a lot of time in Switzerland, more than just the summers. And when I went back to Los Angeles, I was a changed woman, and I got my own apartment when I was 18, and then I got into credit card debt and all this stuff. Way too much information for your podcast, but
no.
It's pretty typical, early 20s stuff. But then I had this whole other experience of finding myself in this dead end office job in a cubicle, having this epiphany, realizing that this was going to be the rest of my life if I didn't change it myself. And so I got real serious and focused about, well, what else am I going to do? I don't know how to do anything. So I knew that I had a knack for creativity and especially shortcuts. I was kind of good at figuring things out on the go. Maybe that was just from traveling so much, but I started going to music classes and started a little band. I started painting. I started drawing a lot more. And I mean, I was already doing all these things a little bit, but I started getting really serious trying to figure out like what was going to stick. What was it?
Right.
Who was I?
Right.
I went on that journey. And then that led me to a museum where William Eggleston was showing some of his photographs, and I was confronted with color photography being shown in a museum as art. And I'd never come across that before, and it totally blew my mind. And that very moment, I decided that was what I wanted to spend my life doing. I wanted to make pictures, and there was something in Eggleston's work that was very contradictory to me, because it seemed like a snapshot that I could have taken, and yet it was moving. It was stirring something inside me.
Right.
In this way that was so intense and emotional that I was really drawn to that aspect. It wasn't necessarily the photography medium. It was more of this ability of his to stir things up in me with something that looked so kind of just like mundane, or, I didn't understand what was going on. So I was really invigorated by this.
No, and that's really interesting, because I love his work, and it's almost like they are these like bites of shared humanity, right? Like, for whatever reason, I don't know if it's a certain amount of nostalgia or sentimentality, or like being able to connect with these things that are, they're part of the mundane, like we recognize them, but we've never looked at those things from the same angle. And, I think one of the things I always found really interesting about Eggleston, if you hear him talk about his process, he was, walking around with a handheld camera, just taking these photos as he found them. And it was like there was no planning, and there was really no post, and he would only take one shot whenever he found something. So it's like each roll was 24 kind of finished shots, which is just crazy to think of, right?
Yeah, I know. The genius that he is.
Right. I understand that you shot a little black and white early on, but for the most part of your career, it's really been about color, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What is it that, has you drawn to, color that is just kind of integral to your work?
There's two movies I love. There's a lot of movies I love, but I love The Wizard of Oz and The Red Shoes, and these are both like very vivid color. And growing up in Los Angeles, you always have this really stark blue backdrop against everything that you see. And colors really come out in a different way when you have that as a backdrop. It actually draws it. I don't know if it tricks your eye into thinking that it's seeing colors in a more vivid way or what, but it creates this harmony to be able to get like the most intensity out of colors. And it's having that much color in a city that's so there's so many problems with it, and there's so much there's a lot of ugliness in LA. I love LA, don't get me wrong. I love the people, and there's so much I love about Los Angeles. I think it's one of the best cities in the world. And my heart will always be there no matter where I go. But I think because I love it so much, I also despise it. I have this love-hate relationship with it. I always have. And I almost have to leave Los Angeles to remember how much I love it. And there's just so much wrong with it. It's so unformed. It's actually changed a lot in the past 5 or 10 years, and it feels very much more formed than it ever did before. But we have this kind of, sadly, we have like kind of I don't know if it's disrespect for our past, because we're always tearing things down that are actually really important historically, and then building a new thing in its place, like no big deal. And it's happening at a very fast pace all the time. So, and then, we have Hollywood, which has a very sinister history, obviously. But there's so many things that are great about Hollywood and so much opportunity, but then, there's also that history, and there's just there's so much dark shit going on in LA, and so to have that really vivid, colorful palette to view all of this like noir shit is really interesting. And I've always loved that juxtaposition between, you know, the beautiful and the ugly, and this idea that there's that conflict there of you can't take your eyes off it and you're lured in, and it's a really useful trick, I think, that Hollywood has used in movies for a long time too, especially in the like 30s and 40s, and especially in noir, is just to make something, like to light it so well and make it look so beautiful that before, like, you're already drawn in by the time you already want to be there, and you're already like an active participant before you realize that the story is really dark. And it's kind of a way of getting people to confront something that they wouldn't otherwise choose to confront, maybe. You know, I think that's also a trick of comedy, to be able to be a comedian. You have a responsibility to tell the truth and talk about things that are happening in the culture, and things that are maybe people don't want to be told, or don't want to experience, and or don't want to look at. But a comedian can kind of, you know, they make you laugh, so you think you're in a safe space, and you're having fun. So what could be bad about this? It feels fun and familiar, and then before you know it, you're looking at yourself, and you're looking at your life, and your understanding goes up a little bit in these areas, because your confront for all of it goes up a little. But that's some basic shit about art, right? That's what we're all trying to do.
You know, it's funny. I remember hearing you saying in an interview that, you know, when you had that kind of light bulb moment that, you know, this is it, I'm going to be a photographer, that a painter friend of yours said that you can't just proclaim that you're a photographer and, you know, now that's your gig. Like you have to kind of like earn it. And he told you not to talk to another photographer for like 2 years. It just makes me think, you know, like, did you actually do that? Did you kind of cloister yourself and come up with your own worldview of photography? And B, I can just imagine how different that trying to do that would be now in this Instagram era of how, you know, we're just kind of bombarded constantly with everyone who kind of proclaims that they are photographers, and, you know, we're kind of constantly thrown these visual images.
Yeah, I mean, I've always really admired nonconformists and people that pave their own way and don't follow the norm, and so that idea of not talking to another photographer for the first couple years, that felt really fun to me, because I think I was looking into going to art center at the time, and I was going to try and do night classes or something, and I was gonna try and make it work with money, and it was all kind of unrealistic, and also my patience wasn't very very high for taking a picture of the same. I mean, you know, this is actually a really funny story considering the film I just made, Run, because in Run there's a huge reflective metal sphere, and going back to Art Center, one of the lessons for the night class that I was looking into was about lighting, and we were going to do something like I think it was like 20 different angles of a metal sphere and light it differently each time, or something like that. I can't remember. If anyone from Art Center hears this, they're going to be like, that's not true. She's lying. We never had that class. But that's how I remember it. And, and I just was like, boring. There's no fucking way I'm going to make it to 20. I'm just going to be so bored out of my mind. And that was the point where I was just like, this just isn't me. Like, I've never been the type of person to learn through repetitive, like arbitrary information. I need to know how it's useful to me, and I want to dive in and make the mistakes in life. That's always been how I've learned the best. Even now, I'm taking sailing classes, and I'm just like, I can't wait to just fuck it up out there on the boat. Not really, like, I got to know enough.
Wear your life jacket.
Yeah, exactly. Like, we really don't go far out. But that's how I learn, and I know that about myself. And so if that's how I learn, I just have to go out and do it. And I'm also the kind of person, like, I'm a creature of comfort too at the same time. Like, I love taking risk, but within that risk, I want to know that I'm using my Contax camera, or like, I want to know that I'm using Portra 400. Like, there's certain things that I just never change. Once I find the thing that I love, unless I need to evolve an idea, and however I've been doing it isn't going to work for that particular idea, that's the only time I'll go out and learn something new technically. Because I'm not one of those photographers, like, I'm not like a gearhead where I want to learn, like, I want to buy a bunch of gear. Like, that part of it has never been interesting to me. And just, like I said earlier, it was never about the medium of photography for me. Even when I saw William Eggleston's work, it was about the craft of creation, of creating something and being able to have that emotional response on someone else, and like have that experience, being able to affect people that way. That's what I wanted. That was what got me.
Well, let me ask you this. I mean, sometimes when you're as successful as you've been, the machine wants you to create more work like what you've done in the past. Is it ever a struggle to explore new areas in new visual narratives?
Yes, it is, because I have my what I want to make, and then I have what I feel like I should make. So I'm always like, there were people that told me not to make short films because how is it, like, how they're so hard to make, and it's such an undertaking financially and logistically, and they kind of make not a lot of sense if you just look at it compared to something like a photograph that I can frame on the wall, and it's pretty easy to show those and ship them, and logistically it doesn't make sense, but that was something I had to do. I had to make these films, and because I think there's an understanding now that my work needs that conversation between my films and my photographs now. And I've really found that to be a way not only to keep me really inspired and challenged in the medium of photography, because I'm constantly reaching new plateaus with photography where I'm like, maybe that's my last picture. I don't know if I'm ever going to have another idea that excites me the way that I did the first time I made a picture. And I want to try and keep that standard. Otherwise, what's the point? Because I don't know, like, I've seen artists have pretty much like one idea that's so effective and so necessary to culture that they're able to kind of do that one idea over and over again for their entire career. And that's great. I think that you can not always kind of sense if they're faking it, or if you can sense it in the work. Like, if they're just doing it because now it's making them money, or if they're doing it because they still need to say that thing. My patience has been a big part of why I've gone into different mediums. Like, now I have these installation pieces at Lehmann Maupin Gallery for my show that's opening January, and that's so exciting to me. Like, I started making installations for my photographs And then for my films, like building these huge pieces and distorting the scale and changing, like I did life sculptures of people, and we made 3D. We've made 3D photographs of them, and then I worked with an artist like a digital artist to distort their bodies and change the way they look and age. I aged certain people like 30 or 40 years, and I made an installation called Big West that was like a 40-foot woman. And, I've done,
oh my gosh.
Yeah, like I've done these things. And now I'm able to show them in galleries, like these things that I made for my films or for my photographs. And now over the last few years, I've started showing them in the gallery space, and that's really exciting. So a lot of it has to do with, like, I have to be true to myself about what's interesting to me. And as long as I'm keeping that line of really honest communication with my own gut and my own instinct about, like, am I keeping it real? Yes. Okay, good. Then I'll move forward, and it'll find its place in the gallery some way, somehow, or somewhere else. Like lately, Run is playing at some film festivals. This is a first for me. This is super exciting.
So, I mean, and, it's going to be my logical next question, which is, just from hearing you talk about your work and your process and how much work you put into character development and storyboarding, the short filmmaking, I think it's an obvious question to ask about your desire to create a feature film. And if that were a goal, do you feel like you'd have to own the project from beginning to end, or would you be willing to come in as an art director or cinematographer, or, do you feel like you're the type of person that would want to own the whole project?
Yes. If I'm doing something, then I have to be totally immersed in it, and I have to be kind of helming that ship, because once I get involved in it, I can see everything so clearly. And as much as I love collaboration and I love bouncing ideas off people and having those conversations, and all of that enriches a project even more, I've always been so specific about what I see that I want to make sure that I can be responsible for that and see it through from beginning all the way to the very bitter end. So that if I messed it up, it's me that messed it up, because I don't want to spend my time on something unless my heart is totally invested, because it's really such a huge, no matter what I do, if your heart isn't invested, it's a massive undertaking, because you're putting yourself out there and standing nude to the world, right? So I need to be the one standing there naked. I don't want anyone else to do it with my own vision, for better or worse. But yeah, I have 2 feature films that I've written, and on one of them I worked with my sister on the screenplay, and another one I worked with, God, I don't know how many writers, but it's been a process, like 3 or 4 different writers, starting with my sister, and then we just couldn't crack it, so we worked with some other people. But whatever it takes, man. It's like storytelling in that form is crazy challenging, and that's only the first step to making a feature film. So I have so much respect for it. I have so much terror of it too. It's such an insane medium, making feature-length films, and I think because it's so terrifying and so many other things, it's definitely the next thing that I'm going to be doing. It's this whole business of feature films is a very new place for me to be in. So there's a lot to learn, I have a lot of help too. I have a great team of people that I work with and I trust and I love. And so, yeah, I mean, normally I don't talk about things before I can show them in their completed form, but
Sure.
movies they take so long to get any part of it done that it actually helps. The more people know about it, I think the more help you might receive moving forward onto the next step. So I think it's only basically, this is a cry for help. This is an SOS on your podcast. I'm making an announcement. No, I'm just kidding.
No.
No, there's just a lot of steps, and the more people that I think you talk to, the more you can tell your story and see where there's plot holes. The more, I love to sit with new people and tell them what the story is, because you can kind of get a reaction, and I can go through all the different beats of the story and talk about with them, like what's resonating, where do you find yourself drifting off. It's great. I think it's it's a totally different medium than photography. And with photography and art, I'm used to staying very quiet and closed-lipped. And I like to treat this one different because it's a different beast.
It just seems like very logical as a photographer. You could settle on a feature film like a Terrence Malick film where there's very little dialogue and it's sort of improvised and you've kind of set up these shots. But it seems like your mind has very rich stories to tell. And I tell you, I certainly want to have you back on whenever it's completed and we can talk all about it. But let's talk about what you do have going on right now, which is your show Part 2 run at Lehmann Maupin in New York. So, just in the title, Part 2 : run, that kind of is alluding back to your show from a couple of years ago, which was Part 1, The Mountain. Does someone need to have some knowledge of that previous show before taking in this work?
No, not at all. It's Part 1, The Mountain, it can stand completely on its own, and Part 2, Run, can as well. The only reason I made them parts is because they were actually supposed to be one show, and it didn't work out that way for so many different reasons. But I really wanted them to be thought of as two parts because they're one and the same. They're not. It's not like I had 10 works and then I split it into 5 for Part 1 and then took the other 5 for Part 2. It's not like that. There were two motions almost, and so they really were a Part 1 and a Part 2, but they were supposed to be shown to. I mean, they were kind of. I conceived them initially as one show, and for whatever reason, it didn't end up that way. And so the way that I decided to approach it was Part 1 and Part 2, which made a lot of sense to me anyway. And Part 2 is really, they're both about my response to the last several years and all that we've been taking on as a collective human experience. And because it's been very challenging and confusing and chaotic and so many other adjectives.
Right.
But I had to make something about it because it goes back to that question. Like, I had such a huge question and I couldn't find anything that was letting me answer that question. I couldn't find any works of art that were asking the question the way I wanted to ask it. And so I put it into Run, and I'm very happy I did, because I actually felt some sense of relief after making Run, not just because the project was finished and completed, but because it was also, it did exactly what I needed it to do for me. I felt some sort of relief, some personal sort of catharsis from it.
That catharsis, is it a sense that you're providing a contribution to a dialogue that will help kind of resolve those issues? Or is it just sometimes just needing to express these things out loud?
Well, the reason I made the ball reflective is because it mirrors back onto you who you are, and distorts the world around it. So I came to the idea that, there's this idea that we're all our own worst enemy, and it kind of brings you back to like if something, like if you're not scared of it, then it doesn't hold power over you, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like mythology has always been useful because it shows us who we are through these stories, these little stories that have been around forever and just being told in different ways. And Hollywood, Hollywood is the modern mythology. And so by showing us what we've been going through in a way that's palatable and fun, funny. It's funny. I don't know if you saw Run, but it's funny. It's absurd. It's terrifying. Hopefully, it's it's supposed to be like it's supposed to just be the chaos of emotions that I was feeling, and that I think we've all been collectively feeling. And by putting us as the like, in a way, it made me feel more in control of the situation, because I was able to create the situation exactly as I experienced it. And literally, there's a player one button that I could press, and I could also stop it. There's this idea of like, I was able to create it and make it like a smaller version of it. Mm-hmm. That was something that I could manage.
Right.
And by doing that, I gained some sort of sense of control. And even though it's maybe just, you could say it's just psychological, because really, like, what change did I really make? But most futures, the future is built on imagination, right? So if I feel that way, then it's essentially true. At least it's true for me. And so I can therefore create a more calm place for myself. I can create a better future, potentially. And especially if we collectively decide something together, then maybe the future actually looks a little brighter than our leaders are telling us,
Right.
Because we're the ones writing the future right now.
Right. No, it was interesting. Just, it was probably about a week and a half ago, I was talking to a classroom full of high schoolers, and I was talking to them about, as part of a creative process, kind of mining emotional things. And, the topic of anxiety came up, and there are a lot of nodding heads, and this girl's like, it starts getting a little emotional. It's like, I just really have this sense of impending doom, and I see all these heads nodding. I'm like, how many of you in this class have this sense, share this sense of impending doom? And it was like 80-90% of them raised their hand. And like, well, what is it? And this girl was like, it just feels like the world's problems are bigger than we'll be able to overcome in our lifetime. And it's just like,
right.
And it's just like to hear out of the mouths of teenagers, and to see that they feel defeated about the world ahead of them, instead of feeling like it's a green field and they can, create whatever they want. It's really disheartening. And it's like, where...
Right. But what I learned through Run is that it's all true. It's just like, pick whatever one is going to be the future that you want. And it's literally like, choose your own adventure. Right. Like, our leaders have been pounding us with all of this doom and gloom. And yeah, it's fucking bleak. And a lot of it's pretty fucking real. But also, what took me back, and which is why Run ends the way that it does, is these human connections, and the human heart is so much more powerful than the media or the government or whoever's telling us over and over and over again that there's not a chance in hell, that there's going to be a future, it's like, just sit down and talk to someone and start like really looking at them and find something about them to admire or laugh about. And then there it is, like just right there in that little moment, there's your future. And all we have to do is, it's like so, I sound like really cliche right now, but all we have to do is believe. That's how I just feel like I just went back to these physical human moments that we experience together. That's what's going to lead us forward.
Right.
And the reason I made Run the way that it is because it's important to look at all of this, I think, with a little bit of space. Like Run is like a mythical version of what we went through, right? If you can call it that. It's just like whatever. It's a version of yeah. So, but we've been through crazy shit before, and we got through it, and we will go through terrible experiences again, and we will get through it. It's a cycle of being alive, and we have to be okay with experiencing all of it. It's because that's where we're going to find, joy in the end. There's this quote from Joseph Campbell, the joyful act of participation in the sorrows of the world. I love this quote because it encapsulates exactly how life has been feeling. It's like we choose to participate every single day that we get out of bed. Sure, we might think the world is ending. We might believe all of it, and it might all feel very real, but the people that open their eyes in the morning and step out of bed and leave their house and maybe even find some joy in the day, and then they go home and they have dinner with their family or whatever. But this is life. This is life. Right. And so I don't really like that our leaders and our media have been so irresponsible, because there's other things to talk about. Yeah, like maybe what they're saying is true, but there's other things to talk about. And if you talk to my 5-year-old son, Francis, he's got a lot to say about the future.
Right.
And I want to listen to that version of the future, because no one is right about the future because it hasn't happened yet.
Right.
That's how I feel.
Yeah. And we have to come to a realization that we have more in common than we don't, right? I feel like a lot of it has fallen at the hands of algorithms and in the coercion of whoever. But, the world has tried to convince us over the last 5 to 10 years that we're a polar opposite. You're either this or you're that, but, that there has to be a common ground. And
exactly, that's why it's physical human connection. Like all of this, like so much more happens in a room when you're in the same space with someone. You can feel an energy around you. It's not just sight and sound like you get on social media. It's like human connection in a physical sense is there's probably endless amounts of the ways that we perceive each other. And that's a flow of communication. You perceive something from someone, some energy that they're putting out, or some heat or warmth, or there's gravity. There's so many other things to it. And those are also ways that we find to connect. Sure. It's not just through words and looking at each other, on a digital screen. Yeah. It's like, this is like, yeah.
And I'm sure you've probably seen that firsthand when you would do those large group photos. You would probably plan those characters individually, but you put them all in the room together, and that humanity, there winds up being something magical there in terms of how people interrelate that you could have never anticipated, right?
Exactly. That's literally like what almost every artist says when they work with people, is it's those moments that they didn't plan that are those are the moments that make the work worth showing, because it's it's always like something I'm watching it happen on set, and I'm just like, oh my fucking God, why is that person doing that? And it makes me so angry because I'm such a control freak. I had my whole shot planned out perfectly. I did sketches. I worked so hard in pre-production to get it just a certain way. And then this one dude is doing this thing. And then when I go into the edit, that's of course the thing that makes the picture. It's always happened my whole career. And it's like, that's that human heart that like, there's so much more to us than just what we look like and what we're saying. There's so many levels of ways that we can find each other and understand each other and love each other. So I think we should try to focus on that.
Absolutely. So Alex, I think that's probably a great place to leave it. I can't thank you enough for your time this afternoon. And so by the time this episode comes out on the 24th, the show will already be up at Lehmann Maupin in New York. And it's going to be up from the 19th to March 4th. I encourage people to go out and see that. Alex, can't thank you enough for your time and allowing me to ask you probing questions.
Yes, thank you so much. This was such a fun conversation.
That's all the time we have for this week. You've been listening to ArtSense. You can find the show on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. If you've enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe. And while you're there, please rate the show and leave a quick review. Your feedback is the key to other folks finding us. And if you'd like to see images related to the conversation, read the transcript, and find other bonus features, you can go to cambia.art and click on the podcast tab. If you'd like to reach out to me, you can email me at craig@cambia.art. Thanks for listening.